Told the United States that one of the Paris massacre suspects had spent time in Yemen training with al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP. And we're also learning both of the brothers were actually on the U.S. terror databases. We're back with the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Republican Congressman Ed Royce of California. If all of this is true, that these guys may have gone to Syria, at least one of them was training in Yemen, and then they went back and committed this terrorist outrage and went through those editorial meetings, calling out names of the cartoonists and the editors and the others, and then executing them point blank like that. It looked like a pretty sophisticated operation.
Not only sophisticated, but also very much in the nature of al-Qaeda's past demands in terms of, as we know, freedom of speech, freedom of religion is not high on their list. We have seen in Pakistan now some 700 schools closed down because of the objection of Islamists against having women educated. So you're going to see in the West increasingly these types of radical organizations carrying out. And
what's chilling is the editor of this publication, Charlie Hebdo, a well-known cartoonist, right, an excellent journalist, Stéphane Charbonnier. He was on the al-Qaeda most wanted list because of some of the cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. He was actually targeted, and if in fact that sends a pretty chilling message to a lot of people all over the world.
It does, but on the other hand, when they targeted him, he said, I'd sooner die standing than on my knees. And he was very defiant, and what you saw from the French population out last night was not afraid, those signs that you saw them holding. I think it's actually going to cause quite a reaction in Europe and quite a demand for freedom of expression. France was the product of the French Enlightenment. You know, this is so part of their culture. I think that this is really going to put a lot of pressure on radical Islam in France to acculturate to the ideals of freedom of speech.
And here's what's also very, very disturbing. I'm sure it is to you as well. There was a second terror incident today. An individual dressed in a black uniform, his face covered in a mask, an AK-47, similar weapon to what was used yesterday in a southern suburb of Paris, goes out there and executes a policewoman in cold blood. And I don't know if there's a connection or not a connection, a copycat or whatever, but what are you hearing?
Well, what we hear is you've got two forces simultaneously in play here. One, al-Qaeda, but then, as you know, there's a different model for ISIS. And what ISIS is asking is for homegrown terrorists to carry out their individual attacks. So this is how this gets so complicated. And for the intelligence services in France, ever more complicated.
And the ramifications, the lessons learned for the United States are what?
Closer cooperation with French intelligence, which is some of the best in the world, as well as other European intelligence networks, a better ability to track those who we monitor, who are trained, and I think border security becomes a real issue as well.
So this is a serious problem. There are 9 other individuals French authorities say have been taken into custody. I don't know if they're related to this incident at the magazine or in the southern suburb of Paris, but what can you tell us about these 9 others that have already been arrested?
Wolf, at this point, we don't know from the French authorities the connections of these 9, but we do know that the French had their eye on some 5,000 jihadists in the country who weren't currently active, but these were all individuals who had been fighting either with ISIS or been trained overseas or gone to Afghanistan to fight, and so they have a long laundry list of people they have concerns about. They monitor them, and if they found any connectivity between them and these 3 individuals, of course, they would bring them in.
As far as you know, the U.S.-French cooperation in intelligence sharing and this kind of counterterrorism is excellent, right?
Long-standing and as close as it gets.
And the Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, announced today he's going to be going to Paris this weekend for high-level ministerial meetings with French authorities. We'll see what happens on that front. The bottom line right now, This was not a lone wolf or lone wolves. This was a coordinated operation. Hold on for a moment, because I want to show our viewers what's going on at Joint Base Andrews outside of Washington, D.C. There's Air Force One. You see the President of the United States has just arrived. He was in Phoenix on other business earlier in the day. He's getting ready to head over to the White House. Michelle Kaczynski is our White House correspondent. Michelle, I know he was briefed aboard Air Force One about what's going on in France, the ramifications for the U.S. What are you learning?
Well, this meeting just wrapped up a short time ago, and it was the Paris attacks that prompted this high-level meeting between the president and his national security team, including his national security advisor, Homeland Security advisor, the Secretary of Homeland Security, directors of the CIA, FBI, and others. The focus was on Paris to update the president fully on the situation, as well as look at the U.S. security posture in light of this. No further detail was given on any changes that might come out of this, but because the president was traveling, this was all done by phone as he was on Air Force One on his way back to D.C. from Phoenix. And we did hear from the president yesterday, as well as others in the administration, but today the White House has been quiet. They're not responding to any details that have come out through law enforcement. They're not weighing in on any of those details, especially since one of the questions out there is foreign fighters, and that has been a big concern of the administration. The press secretary, though, did reiterate what he said yesterday, that the Department of Homeland Security tells him there are no specific or credible threats of terrorist attacks here within the U.S. Wolf?
I know he's aboard a Marine One that'll take him to the White House, the south lawn of the White House momentarily. We'll watch Marine One as it does so. Michelle, thanks very much. We're still here with the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce. Do you have any criticisms? I know a lot of Republicans in the House, they like to criticize the President of the United States, but on this particular issue, the war on terror right now, is he doing the right thing, the wrong thing? What's your analysis?
Well, I think the most important thing right now is let's show our solidarity with France. Let's have the United States stand with our closest and longest ally, France, in terms of the history of this republic and our values, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. I think the Attorney General is doing the right thing, going to Paris in order to deepen these ties, and especially the cooperation, because we're all in this together with respect to these 15,000 foreign fighters that are, fighting with ISIS, but at some point could return to Europe or the United States.
And if, in fact, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen was behind this terror attack against these journalists, these police officers in Paris, what should the U.S. and France and other allies do about it? I know that there are occasional drone strikes in Yemen going after some of these AQAP targets, but what else, if anything, should the U.S. be doing?
Well, I think at that point, we, from Djibouti, where we cooperate with the French forces and elsewhere, we would look very, very closely at everything we could do to absolutely take out those cells. I think you'd see much more operations on the ground in reprisal from France and the United States against al-Qaeda.
And a lot of those drone strikes that go against these al-Qaeda targets in Yemen, they originate from Djibouti, from a base there in Djibouti in the Horn of Africa.
They do, but also it used to be that we would take a lot of these agents into custody with our operations on the ground in order to get sources and learn who else we needed to have arrested. And I think this will be part of the discussion, because you can't do it all from the air. Yeah. At some point, you got to get your agents on the ground, and you've got to take into custody some of these.
Is the Yemeni government doing enough?
Well, the Yemeni in Yemen, Iran is involved in Yemen, trying to, they're in the process of creating insurrection there. You've got these different terrorist networks. It's almost a stateless
it's a real
society right now.
What a disaster. All right, Ed Royce, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks, Wolf.